millions in salary, billions in damage. 10 CEOs who had one job. In July 2005, MySpace was the internet. Teenagers lived there. Bands were born there. It was loud, chaotic, and completely unstoppable. Then News Corp bought it for $580 million and handed the keys to people who saw a community and thought, what if we just covered it in advertisements? Banner ads multiplied, pop-ups appeared before pages finished loading, videos played without warning, music blasted out of nowhere. The users started noticing that the site they loved now felt like a highway billboard that occasionally let you post a selfie. Complaints flooded in, but nothing changed because fixing the experience didn't pay the bills. Ads did. Facebook, meanwhile, kept things clean and fast. By 2008, the exodus had begun. By 2011, News Corp sold MySpace for $35 million. A $580 million purchase gone in 6 years. MySpace wasn't beaten by a better idea. It was suffocated by its own owners. Pan American World Airways once made flying feel like the future. CEO Juan Trippe wanted to keep it that way. In 1963, Pan Am became one of the first airlines to order the Concorde, a supersonic jet that would make every competitor look like they were moving backwards. Then, in 1966, Trippe ordered 25 Boeing 747s for more than $525 million. Because if you are going to project dominance, you might as well go enormous. The planes arrived. They were spectacular. They were also brutally expensive to operate and difficult to fill. Then, the 1973 oil crisis turned jet fuel into liquid gold. The Concorde order was canceled. The 747s kept flying, half empty, burning money on every route. The image held longer than the balance sheet. Pan Am shut down in December 1991. The airline that sold the world a vision of the future couldn't afford to stay in it. On January 9, 2007, Steve Jobs walked onto a stage in San Francisco and showed the world a phone with no keyboard. BlackBerry's CEO Mike Lazaridis watched and was not worried. Serious professionals needed physical keys. Glass screens were a novelty, not a replacement. BlackBerry kept building keyboards. Touchscreens were treated like a phase that would pass. Apps were an afterthought. Email arrived fast, keys clicked satisfyingly, and loyal users stayed put. For a while. Then younger buyers started choosing iPhones, then executives did too. BlackBerry's App Store arrived late and half empty. Their touchscreen phones felt clumsy next to the competition. The company that had once defined mobile communication for an entire generation of business users watched its global market share collapse from nearly 20% to below 1% in under 6 years. All because the people in charge decided that buttons were permanent. General Electric once made everything, literally everything. Light bulbs, jet engines, medical scanners, television networks, and a financial arm so large it quietly made GE one of the biggest banks in America. Under CEO Jack Welch in the 1990s, the strategy was simple. Dominate every market you enter or buy your way in until you do. It worked. For a long time, it worked beautifully. Then Jeff Immelt inherited the machine in 2001 and kept it running at full speed. Profits hit their targets and the empire kept expanding. Then 2008 arrived and GE Capital, the finance division everyone had quietly forgotten, was holding enormous risk and cracked under pressure. The whole company shook. GE needed over $139 billion in government support just to stay standing. By 2018, it had been removed from the Dow Jones Index, a position it had held for over a century. Turns out owning everything means when something breaks, everything breaks with it. In 2003, Friendster was everywhere. If you were online, you had a profile. You added friends, wrote testimonials, and ranked people in ways that would be considered unhinged today. It was the first real taste of social life on the internet. There was just one problem nobody wanted to fix. The site barely functioned. Pages loaded at the speed of regret. Profiles froze. Messages disappeared. At peak traffic, the whole thing collapsed. Engineers raised the alarm. The servers couldn't handle the load. Fixing them was expensive and not immediately profitable, so nothing was fixed. People stayed as long as there was nowhere else to go. However, this changed when MySpace and Facebook came along. By 2005, Friendster's moment had passed. The platform that taught people what social networking could be couldn't keep the lights on long enough to actually deliver it. Jeffrey Katzenberg had a vision. Short, cinematic shows made exclusively for your phone, watched on the go, produced at film-level quality. In April 2020, he launched Quibi with $1.75 billion in funding and genuine Hollywood confidence. Episodes cost up to $100,000 per minute to produce. Big names signed on. The content was, by most accounts, genuinely good. Then people tried to use it. You couldn't cast it to a television. You couldn't share clips. You couldn't take screenshots. The shows vanished once you finished watching them. YouTube existed. TikTok existed. Netflix existed and worked on every screen in your house. Quibi blamed its struggles on the pandemic. Then it burned more cash. By October 2020, 6 months after launch, the whole thing shut down. It wasn't ahead of its time. It was just designed for a problem nobody had. Radio Shack used to be the place your dad went when something needed fixing. For decades, it sold the cables, batteries, and components that kept household electronics alive. Then, the world changed. Phones became sealed units. Cables got cheaper online. Electronics shopping moved to Amazon and Best Buy. Radio Shack's stores stayed exactly as they had always been. Tiny locations, confusing shelves. Staff who pushed extended warranties instead of actually helping anyone. Leadership tried new logos and fresh slogans. They changed the name on the sign. The business underneath stayed frozen in 1987. By 2014, the debt had reached $1 billion, and Radio Shack filed for bankruptcy. It filed again in 2017. The problem was never that electronics changed. The problem was that Radio Shack decided not to. In 2000, Toys R Us was the undisputed king of childhood. But CEO Michael Goldstein knew the internet was coming for retail and that his company had no idea how to sell toys online. So he made a deal with Amazon, paying around $50 million for Amazon to run the entire Toys R Us online store. Amazon handled payments, shipping, logistics, and, crucially, every piece of data about what parents were buying and when. Toys R Us focused on the big stores and the holiday rush. For a moment, it looked clever. Then, by 2004, Amazon started selling toys itself, using everything it had learned from running the Toys R Us store to do it. Lawsuits followed. Toys R Us settled. Amazon kept the knowledge. By 2017, carrying more than $5 billion in debt, Toys R Us collapsed entirely. They paid Amazon to learn how to replace them. Adam Neumann didn't sell desk space. He sold enlightenment. WeWork opened in 2010 with exposed brick, craft beer taps, and the promise of a community that would, in Neumann's words, elevate the world's consciousness. Investors adored him. By early 2019, SoftBank had poured more than $10 billion into the company, pushing its valuation to $47 billion. The actual business model was straightforward. Sign long-term leases with landlords, then rent the same space short-term to startups and freelancers, and hope the gap never closed. In 2018 alone, nearly $1.9 billion disappeared. When WeWork filed to go public and the paperwork became public, investors finally saw the numbers clearly. The IPO collapsed in September 2019. Neumann was pushed out with a payout approaching $1 billion. The offices stayed. The consciousness remained unelicited. Lehman Brothers had survived everything. A century of crashes, wars, and recessions. By the early 2000s, CEO Dick Fuld had convinced himself that size was the same as safety and that the mortgage market would only ever go one direction. Lehman loaded its balance sheet with bonds backed by increasingly risky home loans, borrowing aggressively to buy more. By 2007, the firm owed more than $30 for every single dollar it actually owned. The profits rolled in and bonuses were paid, but then housing prices fell. The bonds became unsellable, and the debts stayed exactly where they were. On September 15, 2008, Lehman Brothers filed for bankruptcy with over $600 billion in liabilities, the largest corporate failure in American history. The firm that thought it was too big to fall turned out to be exactly big enough to take everything down with it. 10 CEOs. 10 decisions that made perfect sense until they didn't. The money was real. The confidence was real. The wreckage was very, very real.